for the Parliament, just like the member states in the Council, we have very different views and very different understandings as our starting point. We've discussed in order to reach a viable compromise. We have worked towards quick, efficient work right from the outset, negotiating informally with Council in a flexible procedure. It's important to win majorities in democratic decision-making and to achieve compromises. A broad-seated consensus has won the backing of the two main political groups in Parliament. Mr. Alvaro thought that this was rather graceless or inept, but Mr. Alvaro wasn't in Brussels at the end of the negotiations. Both the big groups agreed informally on a position, after which the UK presidency was informed, and on that basis we achieved an agreement in Council. I think we can regard the following as successes for Parliament. The quantity of types of data has been substantially slimmed down from the original Commission proposal. On the types of criminal offence, we all agree that we should cover things including terrorism, serious criminal offences defined by national legislation taking into account the European arrest warrant. This is a great merit of the European Parliament, that as far as possible data protection has been enshrined within the directive. We have a balanced relationship now between protecting citizens against serious criminal offences and terrorism on the one hand, and a preservation of privacy on the other hand. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. We now move on to the Socialist Group. Mr. Kreisel-Dörfler is the speaker for 2.5 minutes.
Herr Präsident, verehrte Kolleginnen und
President, colleagues. We are not voting on the Council paper on data retention. We are voting on a compromise which a majority of the members in committee and the Council had to achieve together. The European Parliament, for the first time, has been involved in activities under the third pillar, that is to say internal security. Now, not all member states wanted us to have co-decision, including my own government. We have to decide at which point the European level can intervene at a national level and where it shouldn't intervene. And also, we don't want to cut the rights of the national parliaments unnecessarily or to steal their competences. That's why the federal minister tabled a parliamentary objection. In the European Parliament, however, we succeeded in getting the Council to reach an agreement with us and to change improve several points of the original Council proposal. Data retention is a very important instrument, amongst other instruments, to combat serious crime, such as internationally organised crime and terrorism. Some member states, such as the UK, Spain and Sweden, already use this instrument. That's why it was all the more important for us to act at a European level and to set the minimum guarantee before further measures were taken at national levels. This would have escaped any influence by us in the co-decision process. And of course, I think we've managed to get across the question of costs, as well as a compromise on the amount of data to be retained. And not the traffic data of so-called failed calls, they were not to be included, except in those cases in which the companies save such data in any case. In the member states are left to determine the period from 6 to a maximum of 24 months. Only where they already apply a longer timetable, such as, for example, in Italy, will it be possible to retain their own regulation. As the case of Poland, I would like some more information on what's going on there. Regarding data protection, again, it has been strengthened in terms of the original document. National regulation should apply in terms of how the data is dealt with. Now, the large majority of my group is going to vote in favour of this compromise, although there may be room for improvement nonetheless. Just one last sentence to Mr. Alvaro.
Merci, Monsieur Cavada.
Thank you, Mr. Cavada. You're now going to speak on behalf of your group. You have to.
Monsieur le Président,
President, it's incumbent on me having worked collectively on this, to thank Commissioner Frattini for his sensible proposal, and to thank the Minister, Mr. Clark, representing the Presidency in office, for his efforts here. You have worked in respect for the prerogatives of Parliament, even though the common ground at the beginning was hard to discern. It's fundamental, not important, the vote tomorrow, because it lays the groundwork for a community framework and puts some restrictions on the discretion of member states as to the duration and volume of data to be retained for the purposes of fighting crime and terrorism. And secondly, it does so because the limits laid down are reasonable. They are acceptable to all and sundry. The minimum data retention period is 6 months, which broadly is in line with what we already have in the case of telecoms operators for the purposes of managing contracts and marketing. This 6 months period was already suggested by the national authorities for data protection at the time when the initial directive on data protection was adopted. Secondly, it's fundamental because Parliament wanted to demonstrate to Council and above all to its own citizens that it is prepared to be accountable and take into account not just economic interests but also imperatives having to do with the protection of their security and fundamental rights. Now, personally, President, I can't see economic interests which would override the general interest in such difficult circumstances, irrespective of the cost and who is to incur those costs. Whatever the current legal framework of the treaties, which is rather schizophrenic at the present time, the Constitution would have saved us from this plethora of different legal pillars, but we have to work with the current legal basis. The Court has recently been looking into this. We've been hastened into creating community legislation which we all too keenly need. Tomorrow's vote will throw into relief the contradictions and the limitations of the current legal scenario, admittedly so, but that vote will also moot something new in this area which is of interest to public opinion. They are able to understand that we are working with a goodwill and are transcending political rivalries and legal niceties to serve their interests. By way of a conclusion, President, on behalf of the committee I'm honoured to chair, I can tell you that we are prepared in other circumstances to face down this smartly placed challenge, and we will go on working on the basis of this excellent cooperation between Council, Commission and Parliament. Thank you very much indeed.
Merci.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the Green Group. Mrs. Buitenweg, you have 2 minutes. Thank you, President. President, I've had a discussion with the colleagues, and I've often said that even for the Green Group, the right to privacy isn't a sacred cow. And of course, it can be justified, interfering with this data can be justified if a balanced approach is taken. Of course, we have the fight against terrorism, we're fighting against organised crime, and what we need is more investment in proper research, proper analysis of existing data, better cooperation between security services and police services. Money can only be spent once, even the euro, and that money is going into massive surveillance instead of proper investigation of crimes. Therefore, I think the wrong approach has been taken overall. Data retention, especially regarding telephone information, I could have supported. Mr. Clark has only talked about telephony, about this telephone data. But what about someone on the internet? What about the information about logging on and logging off? What about all of the data which can be stored by a computer? It seems that to register such information is pointless. Now, we always talk about better regulation in the Parliament. And then we get nonsense like this. We haven't even calculated the cost to business. Forgetting proposals about social policies or economic policies. We always have to have cost assessments of those, but apparently in this case we don't. Then to the big groups, I was in favour of trying to get this wound up quickly, that is to say after first reading in the European Parliament. But you managed to strike a deal with the British presidency before the Parliament had even given its proper opinion. And now
we have to like it or lump